Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to tonight's presentation of Family Values Alliance Ballarat. And tonight we're talking about the naked truth. And we're looking at the gay lobby's influence on media, on culture, and on education, and as a result, education on society as a whole. As you know, I'm Diane Colbert, and I've worked in a variety of different roles. I have been training coordinator for Lifeline as organising the training for the volunteer telephone counsellors. I'm an accredited mental health first aid instructor, and I've worked in social welfare and a variety of other roles, and my qualifications are in counselling and family therapy. So there's actually a month called LGBT History Month. And so I thought that's actually a good place if I'm going to talk about the history of the gay lobby to start. And there's a website dedicated to the promotion of that month, and they've actually got one person a day that they highlight as part of the gay lobby. And one of those people is Dr. Alfred Kinsey. And for those who may not know, he was the founder of sexology, as they write, the father of sexology. And I've taken this off of their website so you can know what the gay lobby says about Dr. Alfred Kinsey, okay? His groundbreaking and controversial research on human sexuality profoundly influenced social and cultural values. And that is very true. We are all profoundly influenced in society today because of the fraudulent work of Dr. Alfred Kinsey, and I'll explain more about that as we go. So it tells us a bit about how he grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey, the oldest of 3 children in a devoutly religious home. His father was a strict disciplinarian and insisted the family attend church every Sunday. Now that was how he grew up, but he really rebelled against that. And he appeared to be a happily married man. That was what the world perceived him as. And that's how his research was able to make so much ground, because this is purely outside of myself, nothing to do with me. The truth was, he was sexually addicted. He engaged in homosexual activity with his colleagues and co-workers as well as others. And he also used information that he'd paid paedophiles to take, and that information was put into tables and sold as if it's true. And so you'll hear the lie today, the profound lie, that children are sexual beings from birth. And that comes from his groundbreaking research, which is basically paying paedophiles for information on their paedophilia acts. So really, the history, they lift this man up as if he is a wonderful person, but he actually used fraud to change society, to change the values of society. And I will show you some of the ways that the work that he did has changed the society that we live in. So he published Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male in 1948, where he made some very bold claims about men and how they had between 10 and 35% having at least one homosexual contact. Now, you have to understand that his figures were gained by using a lot of men who were in prison, men who had sexual convictions, by using a lot of prostitutes, male prostitutes. So he actually made it as if this is the normal public, but he actually was using research from people who were really highly sexually perverted. And then in 1953, his following book, The Sexual Behaviour in the Human Female. So these 2 books, known also as the Kinsey Reports, became bestsellers and sparked a firestorm of controversy. So his studies found that 37% of American men had at least one homosexual experience. And I wonder, when you look at that 37%, is how many of those is he talking about that were actually boys that were abused by a male homosexual? You may or may not know it, but there is actually a website called NAMBLA, North America Man-Boy Love Association. This website's been in existence for almost 40 years. It's obviously pedophilia. They are promoting man-boy love. My question is, why are they allowed to exist when they are promoting pedophilia so openly? So, Dr. Judith Reisman is a wonderful researcher who has studied Kinsey and the impacts of Kinsey. And it all started, really, when her 13-year-old daughter was abused by a 15-year-old boy. And as a result of this, she was obviously horrified, and she phoned a relative and talked about the experience. And she was most surprised to receive the response, well, probably your daughter was asking for it. After all, children are sexual from birth. So, quite distressed by the response, not getting any validation of the horror of what her daughter had been through, that experience. Her daughter was depressed, which is why she found out about the abuse. She phones another friend and she gets exactly the same response. Well, probably she was asking for it. After all, children are sexual beings from birth. And she writes in her book that it wasn't until some time later where she realized where this came from. It came directly from the research of Kinsey, and that's where people had picked up the idea, the false idea, that children are sexual beings from birth. The way they described orgasms is the child cried out or they fainted. Well, extreme pain makes a child faint. Crying out because of pain. These children were being horribly abused, and this abuse, their cries were labelled as orgasms. That's how sick these paedophiles are. So the result of the work of Kinsey is, he said, this is what is happening. I am a scientist. This is the science. So his faulty, fraudulent research sparked a revolution legally. There were, before Kinsey, common law, and that was based on actually biblical authority. Okay, conjugal sex was the only legal sex, sex between a married man and a woman. The sex laws were very restrictive, and offenders were penalised, imprisoned. Capital punishment, the death sentence, was employed on certain sexual offences. Post-Kinsey, not that long after, there was a different code, a model penal code based on science authority, supposedly. And so consent defines legal sex if the person consents to it. It's no longer about whether it's adultery or fornication or homosexual or man and woman. It's completely changed. The sex laws become very permissive. And offenders are often paroled, don't face any time in prison, pardoned, treated as patients. Those poor things, they couldn't help it. That's just how they're born. So some of the specific laws, this is Dr. Judith Kinsey in one of her presentations, and I owe a debt of gratitude to her for her amazing work over the past 40 years in researching Kinsey and exposing Kinsey as the fraud that he is. So 1948, before his books come out, the age of consent everywhere was 16, 18 or 21 years old, nothing younger. Rape, in 18 states in the US, that would be the death sentence, and life imprisonment in 22 states. So rape was taken very seriously. Statutory rate, death in 16 states. Seduction. Now, seduction is, you are so beautiful, you know, I really am going to marry you, but I can't marry you yet, but let's just have sex anyway. Okay, that's seduction. That was illegal, and you faced prison or fines for that. Divorce, fault, alimony was needed to be paid for it. Okay, child custody went to the mother, and abortion was absent. There was no grounds for it. It was punishable. It was illegal. Post 1955, after his books have sparked the sexual revolution, okay, age of consent can be anywhere from 12 to 18 years old in the States from 1955. Rape, 6 months to 4 years imprisonment. So we've gone from life or the death penalty to 6 months or 4 years. Statutory rape, nothing to 2 years. Seduction, legal. If they consent, no problem. Adultery was decriminalised. It was no longer a criminal act to have sex outside of your marriage. And divorce, no fault, no alimony payable. Child custody, financially based, whoever wanted to and could take care of them financially. And abortion, we know, has been legalised. So these are the dramatic changes, and I really give credit to Kinsey as being one of the gay lobby's founders, as they do, because he was homosexual in spite of his keeping up his appearance as being a heterosexual married man. And so he really is the one who founded the gay revolution. Now, what's very interesting is even his research contradicts itself, which people haven't picked up. Okay, in his first book, Sexuality in the Human Male, women are undersexed moralists, agents of social control. We are uninterested in sex, and we are devoted to reforming men. That was women in 1948. Somehow, between 1948 and 1953, women became 50% fornicators, 40% adulterers, 100% sexually active, birth to death, if no social restrictions. My, what a difference that 5 years made in his research between men and women. So obviously there was some kind of tampering with the research for it to go from that extreme to that extreme. And these are the things that Alfred Kinsey has fraudulently claimed. So going back to the impact, okay, the 1962 Vanderbilt Law Review. Okay, this is talking a little bit about paedophilia now. This is what is quoted. Even at the age of 4 or 5, her seductiveness may overwhelm the adult into committing the offence. That's right, that 4 or 5-year-old has the power to overwhelm the adult into committing the offence. Or, in the affair, notice they're calling an act of sexual abuse an affair, okay? Often the young female is the initiator and seducer. So it's all the young female's fault. It's no longer no responsibility on the adult predator. Another one of the major changes due to the gay lobby is the change to the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, the DSM. And it used to be known as a mental illness if someone was homosexual. It was known as not normal behaviour. But due to the work of the gay lobby, that was eliminated from the Statistics Manual. And Charles Socrates, a psychiatrist, comments on this. He writes, "In my 1994 report, I noted that a revolutionary change in sexual mores and customs had been ushered in by that singular act of considerable consequence, the removal of homosexuality from the category of aberrancy by the American Psychiatric Association in 1973. It was a fateful consequence of, and a disregard of established psychoanalytic and psychological knowledge of homosexual behaviour. So he's saying the psychiatrists who should have known better, should have known that this was wrong because they knew the psychological science. Yet they took it out anyway because of the pressure of the gay lobby. At that time, I presented an account of the social and political forces within and without the American Psychiatric Association responsible for this act, and critically examined the spurious and pseudo-scientific reasons put forth for the removal of a diagnosis from the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. This removal amounted to a full approval of homosexuality and an encouragement to aberrancy by those who should have known better, both in a scientific sense and in a sense of the social consequences of such a removal. And boy, haven't we had a huge amount of social consequences having had that removed from being a mental health issue. Those who wished to retain homosexuality as a valid diagnosis had been essentially silenced at meetings. Does that sound familiar, being silenced at meetings? Lectures and publications. You won't find anyone who is against anything in the gay lobby in any of the mainstream media, and that's just a fact. A silencing that originates both from within our organisations and from other sources. So later on, what they call conversion therapy was made illegal. Now, conversion therapy is, let's just say someone comes to me and they say, Diane, I'm really struggling with my sexuality. I'm attracted to males as a male, but I know I don't want to be. I don't want to be. I want to change. It would be illegal for me to help them to do what they want to do. So, because that's called conversion therapy. So what the lobby has done is they have made it that people who choose, no, I want to be heterosexual, to look into their past. For many people, they discover that they have those attractions because of sexual abuse or because of dominance in the home or because of other experiences, traumatic experiences. And they are genuine experiences that need to be worked through in counselling. But you're not really allowed to do that if it's known that, yes, you did conversion therapy. You help someone to go from homosexuality to heterosexuality. That's illegal. So Charles Socarides comments, it is as well against all humanistic concepts embodied in our profession, as well as against the First Amendment rights of any individual seeking help and the First Amendment rights of any therapist to attempt to outlaw or discriminate against such treatment. In other words, people who come to you, they have the right to choose the kind of treatment they want. And to say you cannot give them the treatment they want, that is discriminatory. So now I want to introduce you to two men, Harvard graduates, and they have written a book called After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear of and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. Sure. And these men were very influential because up until that point, a lot of the way that the gay lobby worked was they were quite open about certain things, and they presented images such as men and boys in sexual positions and things that they knew the world would not accept. And basically what these guys taught is they taught a way of publicising homosexuality so that it would be made acceptable. And they write in their book, our effect is achieved without reference to facts, logic, or proof. No, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, okay? Through repeated infralogical emotional conditioning. And boy, don't we see that happening? Emotional conditioning. If you disagree with me, you're a homophobe. Emotional conditioning. It is pretty much blackmail. So we are being emotionally conditioned to accept that if you don't like what the gay lobby is doing, then you are a homophobe, you're a hater, you are an evil person. If you're a good person, you're going to accept everything that we are doing. And they write, the person's belief can be altered whether they are conscious of the attack or not. Notice how they even recognize that it's an attack on our conscience. Indeed, the more he is distracted by even specious surface arguments, the less conscious he will be of the true nature of the process. In short, jamming, calling you a homophobe as soon as you bring up something you disagree with, that's jamming you, stopping you from presenting your point of view logically, okay, succeeds insofar as it inserts even the slightest frisson of doubt and shame into the previously held unalloyed beliefs regarding heterosexuality and homosexuality. And so these two very clever Harvard graduate students, one of them was a law graduate student, taught the gay lobby how to present their case in a way that it would slowly make people accept this is the norm and you are bad and you are wrong if you disagree with us. How terrible you are to disagree with it. Now, there's a media association called NLGJA, the Association of LGBTQ Journalists, and they work in the highest levels of media, television, newspaper. They basically are a guard dog. They watch what comes out. So you will very rarely see anything negative in the media about a homosexual because they don't want that to come out. They don't want that truth out there. However, if anything happens to a homosexual, you will often see reporting very loudly, this homosexual is a victim of, regardless of what the act is. Dr. Judith Reisman, in her book, Crafting by Homosexual Youth, refers to one very specific case where this occurred. She writes, in the last 5 years, the news media have forwarded liberal accusations that Gingrich and Bob Dole were somehow responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing, that pro-life activists somehow encouraged the killing of abortionists, and now once again a climate of conservative speech is endangering the safety of average Americans. Any media outlet that claims to be a forum for fair, high-minded debate should reject these outrageous smears. Instead, the press simply promotes the demand of the liberal climate cops that conservatives shut up before they kill again. So, mainstream gay activists furiously deny any and all attempts to link homosexuality with sexual abuse or violence against children, and understandably so. No group would want to be on the receiving end of the guilt by association tactics advocated by Kirk and Madston. While this article does not suggest that all homosexuals are child molesters, the overwhelming evidence finds that mainstream gay activists and publications regularly flirt, indeed promote, the notion of pedestry, sex between adults and children of the same sex. For example, from a group that had promised they would never reach out to vulnerable teen population for recruits, the lead article recently in The Advocate centres on Adam Noble, who allegedly discovered he was gay when he was just 11 years old. One finds in the same issue under Arts and Entertainment, reviews cheering a Broadway play in which their hero has a soft spot in his heart for paroled convicts and choir boys. Perhaps one of the most memorable media events of 1998 was the murder of Matthew Shepard, a freshman at the University of Wyoming. The Shepard murder case is a case study in media bias and the politicization strategies outlined by Kurt and Madston. Shepard was lured from a bar, robbed, beaten mercilessly, and left unconscious. He later died in a hospital. The press and gay activists quickly turned Shepherd's death into a cause célèbre, even though the family members asked that his death not be publicised. They assigned blame for an anti-gay hate climate and trickle-down hate culture on conservative Christians. The Media Research Centre documented how established media, including NBC Today, Time and Newsweek, tried to smear Christians and conservatives by blaming them for an anti-gay climate that resulted in the death of Matthew Shepherd. Later we hear that it was actually more to do with the robbery, and that was why he was murdered, than because he was a homosexual. Part of how we know that there is real bias is the press ignored the nearly simultaneous rape murder of a 13-year-old Arkansas boy, Jesse Durkising, found bound, gagged, repeatedly raped in a sadomasochistic ritual by two trusted homosexual partners, friends of the child's mother. Likewise, the press ignored the 1997 rape murder of Jeffrey Curley, aged 10, by two homosexual partners until the parents filed a $200 million lawsuit against the North American Man-Boy Love Association. So the press is highly biased, and it ignores what it wants to ignore, and it promotes what it wants to promote. So one of the gay lobby websites is called Creating Change. They hold a yearly conference. You have to understand they are very organised and very systematic. They seek positions of power in universities so that research is biased in their direction. They seek positions of power in politics. They seek positions of power in media, education, in every area, so that they can infiltrate their ideas within each area of influence. One of those examples is their toilet bathroom sign that they've been promoting. Sometimes because of how people look, they aren't allowed to use the restroom. We can do better. How terrible that we don't want men walking into women's restrooms where little girls might be. We are just so terrible that we would discriminate. Or that we don't want young boys in school walking into the change rooms of young girls, because there are obvious differences, and those differences, biological, genuine differences, scientific differences, should be respected. I put in this slide because I actually wanted to point out a contradiction that runs through a lot of the gay lobby's teaching. Can't help it if you're homosexual, you're born that way, right? That's one of the things you hear. Can't help it. Born transgender, born trapped in the wrong body. But then they talk about your sexuality being fluid. You might feel like a boy today, so you're a boy today. You might feel like a girl tomorrow, you're a girl tomorrow. Very obvious contradiction that we have here. If you are always born that way, then there's no way your sexuality could be fluid, could be changing, because you were born that way, right? So there's some actually really obvious contradictions even within the things that they teach. And that's why I wanted to point out, when they talk about bisexual, pansexual, fluid, that it's really contradictory. And you know, it's very confusing for children. Children, they grow up sorting out, who is the world? Who am I? And we need to let them know feelings are never the base for scientific evidence. And yet they're being taught that your feelings are science, and science, well, that's not factual. That's what they're being taught in this education. There's a website called QWERTY, and I really like the fact that they've chosen to be honest. Can we please just start admitting we actually do want to indoctrinate kids? Thank you for being honest. Free of an agenda except the gay one, that's their byline, so you know where it's coming from, okay? Now, I apologise for the language in this. It's important for people to understand exactly what the gay lobby is pushing for. The younger generation doesn't fear homosexuality as much because they're exposed to fags on TV, online, and at school. This is the gay lobby saying these words, okay? I'm not calling anyone a fag, they are. And I don't know a single lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender person who wants that to stop. I, for one, certainly want tons of school children to learn that it's okay to be gay, that people of the same sex should be allowed to legally marry each other, and that anyone can kiss a person of the same sex without feeling like a freak. And I would very much like for many of these young boys to grow up and start fucking men. I want lots of young ladies to develop into young women who voraciously munch box. I want this just as badly as many parents want their own kids to grow up and rub urinary tracts together to trade proteins and forcefully excrete a baby. How offensive that language is that they use. But this is how they think. And with their own lobby, they are quite open about their agenda. So I do apologise for that language. I would never use that language generally, but I think it's important that we understand what's really happening and going on. Education has been influenced. Since Kinsey, Kevin Jennings was appointed in a very high position in the US education system, and he masterminded a scheme of gay infiltration into the classroom using tolerance. We have to be tolerant, and anti-bullying programs as a perfect path to classroom indoctrination. Sound familiar to what's happening in Australia now? In 1995, Jennings made a speech to a gay group in which he somewhat outlined the agenda's strategy. If the radical right can succeed in portraying us as preying on children, we will lose. Their language is laced with subtle and not so subtle innuendo that we are after their kids. He then went on to propose a strategy of how they could get at our kids, get at your kids. Jennings was in charge of making public schools safe for leftists and homosexuals and to disseminate pro-homosexual propaganda and indoctrination to American school children. And when I look at some of the things that my friends in America put on Facebook, he's done that very, very well. He is an accused but never convicted promoter of pedophilia and was the founder of the Gay, Lesbian and Straight Education Network. So there's a school reading list that's talked about. A New Jersey school district apologised to parents after requiring high school students to read books that included graphic depictions of lesbian sex and a homosexual orgy. But listen to what the superintendent said. Students have seen much more graphic things on television or in the movies. So that makes it okay that the media is doing it. We're allowed to do it too. We're allowed to sodomise your children because the media is. That was the Education Department's excuse. Again, we can see the influence coming through book reading lists. Here we have a teacher teaching 6th graders, okay, so 11 to 12-year-olds, how to strap on a dildo, a sex toy. I have a friend who was visiting last night, and her daughter a couple of years ago was in the Catholic education system in Year 9, and she told me about what happened in that Year 9 class. There was a person who came in from a health education department to teach them sex education, and she said they actually, after the class, had comments like, "I need to bleach my mind." This is the 13 to 14-year-olds. They recognised this was inappropriate for them. I need to bleach my mind. They could not stand the things that they were being exposed to. They were being taught a lot about anal sex and oral sex. They were given a demonstration of sex toys in their class, and for an excursion for 13 to 14-year-olds, because this is highly appropriate, they were taken to a nightclub for a school excursion. with their sex education class. And you know, I remember some of her comments to me. This young girl, she felt really violated by these classes, and understandably so. And she talked about how several other members of her class also felt really violated. This sex education was not helpful. It was extremely unhelpful. And that's what the door has been opened to because of the work of the gay lobby. This picture here is a picture of Dr. Alfred Kinsey and some of his associates. And this article from The Spectator says, an extremely disturbing arsenal of social engineering schemes has been lined up against Victorian children and their parents in a triad of safe schools, resilience, rights and respectful relationships, and the Doctors in Secondary Schools programs. Scratch beneath the surface of these three sweet-sounding initiatives and you will find Kinsey-esque child sexualization, unproven sociological gender theories being presented as fact. Remember, transgenderism has never been proven. It's a theory. It is not a fact. And unsupervised GP appointments being conducted behind parents' backs on school grounds during school hours. So all of this is happening in Victoria, in Victorian schools. Now, age of consent, if you look at this, it doesn't look too bad. It says, you know, the age of consent in the Australian Capital Territory is 10 years and New South Wales is 16 years. And in Victoria, 16. But go beneath the surface. The law in Victoria sets clear age limits for when you can legally have sex. This is called age of consent. And 12 to 15 years old, this is what I want to highlight. If you are 12 to 15, a person can't have sex with you, touch you, or sexually or perform a sexual act in front of you if they are more than 2 years older than you, even if you agree. However, it is not an offence if the person honestly believed that you were 16 or if there was less than a 2-year age difference between you. This is exactly 2 years. For example, if a person is 17 and has sex with someone who is 15, it is not a crime. But if the person was 18, it is a crime unless the person believed the person was 16. So all they have to do is say, oh, I thought they were 16. And then, yeah, I told him I was 16. And there's no penalty whatsoever. Now, it actually gets even worse. One of the states, the age of consent was 10 years old. And another of the state, it said 12 years old with no more than 3 years age gap. So it could be a 12-year-old having sex with a 15-year-old. So what is this doing? This is conditioning people more and more to accept sex with children as normal. So I read a book written by a policewoman in Britain, Policing Innocence. And she talks about pedophilia, and that is her area of specialisation. And in chapter 1, she asks the question, what is a pedophile? And she answers, the pedophile is sexually aroused by children. And do we not see this everywhere in the gay lobby, that they are sexually aroused by children? They advocate and write things about it all the time. Some examples. There was a case where someone was raped, and afterwards the press writes, the case clearly involves the process of change that has been commented on elsewhere, that 95% of sexual contact between adults and children aged under 12 are situations where trauma does not happen at the time of sexual contact. Trauma is experienced when the young person comes to appreciate society's views and punishment directed at a person involved in such exchanges. So they're saying, no, the being sexually abused, that's not traumatic. It's the fact that society tells you it should be traumatic. That's what traumatizes you. This third point suggests we, as a society, can reduce that trauma by changing the way we act. So we should not tell a child that it's wrong for someone to abuse them. We should say that's normal, because then that will reduce the trauma for them. So there's a website called Before You Act, and it's basically helping people to understand that pedophilia is really the way you were born. You can't help it, okay? So it's an orientation, it's not a choice. Have you heard that somewhere before? Mm-hmm. Efforts to treat pedophilia are similar to methods used on homosexuals 50 years ago and similarly ineffective. So in other words, they're saying you can't treat pedophiles because that's the way they were born. You used to try to change homosexuals and that didn't work, see, because it's wrong. So it's not going to work because it's wrong to try and change a pedophile. That's what they're saying. Minor attracted persons. Isn't that a lovely term for a pedophile? A minor attracted person. Okay? Do not exhibit narcissism, psychosexual immaturity, psychopathology, neurosis, or any personality disorder more than people attracted to adults. In other words, they're just like you and they're just like me. They're no different to us. One more thing. According to Cranmer, many minor attracted persons interact with minors in a variety of non-sexual ways and develop close friendships with them. Oh, isn't that comforting? Just so comforting that they develop non-sexual close friendships with children. Now, this is an example of how the media promotes what they choose to promote. This is a breaking story from last August. Did anyone hear about the largest pedophile ring in history? 70,000 members, heads of states being discovered? Who heard about that? I only heard about it last night, actually. At dinner last night, someone told me. So then I had to do a little bit of research to dig and find it. This is what the media does. They do not tell us about these things because they don't want you to know that's happening, that is going on. 70,000 members in one pedophilia ring. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the media and the way that they are subtly and not so subtly trying to change people's values, have a listen to the rebel media and Google how the left pushes pedophilia, or if anyone's fast enough to write down the link, you can just go to that link there. And here we have a very clear description of how the left are sexualizing young women through the media and young boys. And yeah, I'm not going to tell you what happens on that. I'll let you watch that for yourself. It is worth watching because they do show a couple of scenes from a couple of films. But an example they don't talk about is Modern Family. You know, that has normalized homosexuality. That's what the media is doing. It's making them fun, making them nice, good people. And my understanding is around 68% of films now have a homosexual couple involved in the film. You know, so for a small percentage of the population, they are now overrepresented in the media. Bob wants a revolution of ideas to create a world where young pedophiles don't have to grow up tortured by their attraction, but find understanding from their families, their friends, and the mental health community, which has yet to show any official compassion to the pedophilic population. Let me say that again. This is an article tackling a tough subject, why I made a documentary about pedophiles. And the man who made the documentary says that when he spoke to a man, Bob, he wants a revolution of ideas to create a world where young pedophiles don't have to grow up tortured by their attraction, but find understanding from their families, their friends, and the mental health community, which has yet to show any official compassion to the pedophilic population. In other words, they want you to say, you were born that way, that's normal, and to treat them like a victim. I believe many people who do become pedophiles do so because they are exposed early to sexual images, and that actually creates a distorted neurological path in their brains. We know from neuroplasticity that the more you see and view something, the more it forms a pattern. This is normal. The less you view something, the less you will believe that something is normal. Now, I want to talk about an often quoted manifesto. It's the Gay Manifesto. Often that first sentence is left out, and the gay lobby is pretty unhappy that we don't put the first sentence in, so I thought I'd make sure you knew what the context was. This is an essay. Okay, this essay is an utter madness, a tragic, cruel fantasy, an eruption of inner rage on how the oppressed desperately dream of being the oppressor. So what this man who was asked to write for the Gay magazine is saying is, this is what I'd really like to do and this is how I feel. Didn't want that part to be left out when we say what the essay contained, okay? So here's the first paragraph, it's a lot longer. We shall sodomize your sons, emblems of your feeble masculinity, of your shallow dreams and vulgar lies. We shall seduce them in your schools, in your dormitories, in your gymnasiums, in your locker rooms, in your sports arenas, in your seminaries, in your youth groups, in your movie theatre bathrooms, in your army bunkhouses, in your truck stops, in all your male clubs, in your houses of Congress, wherever men are with men together. Your sons shall become our minions and do our bidding. They will be recast in our image. They will come to crave and adore us. Now, is that not actually what the gay lobby has been doing and is doing? It's exactly what they're doing. So, and why are they doing it? They are outraged to be called not normal. And so as a result, I've been oppressed, I'm going to oppress you. So if anyone's interested, you can read the full manifesto afterwards. It's actually really interesting, and I can also email you a copy electronically if you would like me to do so. So these are some of the things that we should be aware of that is happening with the gay lobby and how they are influencing media, the school and education system, politics, and every area of society. As you can see, we have been profoundly impacted by the work of the gay lobby. That's the end of tonight's presentation. Thank you so much for coming. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
If I can make this statement, in 1973 the American Medical Association was attacked also, and they were forced to take that mental illness out of their wording, their whole act, okay? So it's both the psychiatric and the American Medical Association.
Basically what happened with the Medical Association is Dr. John Money had a theory, and his theory is that instead of trying to make the mind fit the body, let's make the body fit the mind. And so he threw out what we know in mental health, and that is that feelings, when you treat feelings as truth and they're not the truth, they create mental distress. He threw that out. It is one of the 10 common thinking distortions, and he decided to test his theory, and then he used fraudulent work to prove his theory, completely fraudulent. If you look up the John Joan case, you will see that he used fraudulent work to prove his theory. So you were absolutely right. The Medical Association also normalized transgenderism, and just because something can be done does not mean that it should be done. Just because you can completely cut off healthy parts of your body and exchange them for plastic surgery doesn't mean you should do that. And the result is that there is incredible mental illness among transgender people after surgery. And that is because trying to treat a psychological problem with a physical solution does not work. They have not dealt with why they feel the way that they feel, and it never will work. And that's why we have such high suicide rates, because they have tried to treat a problem with the wrong solution.
Yep.
Thank you all very much for coming out this evening, and thank you for your attention. Have a great night.
Yeah.